Welcome to All Things Moore County, Moore County's weekly radio show, highlighting the many facets of the Sandhills. That includes real estate, lifestyles, community, and neighborhood. And now, from 4 Properties, here's your host, Bill Sahadi.
Our house in the middle of our street. Our house.
Good morning and welcome to the talk show, All Things Moore County. Dorothy, we have a great topic for our show this weekend.
Yes, it seems to be an interesting one.
How many times in the past have we spoken or have you heard us talk about different generations, different expectations, how people from different age groups have different requirements or outlooks about the way they live their lives? You're probably bored of hearing me talk about it.
Well, I think I've run out of fingers, so I can't count anymore.
We've had no less than 4 different generations of people on, from students in the middle school, in communities and schools, to people in the Civic generation, retired military people.
Yeah. We've had all walks of life in here.
Well, we have two experts. We have one expert who actually just wrote a book on the Millennials, which is one of the 4 or 5 generational groups that we are all living with side by side. And we're speaking about local author Dr. Jolene Erlacher, who wrote a book on Millennials as it applies to the ministry, but has a very wide application into the workplace, into the family. And we're going to get schooled today with a lot of good information. Jolene, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for coming in to join us. I'm glad you had reached out to us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
You are a mother of twins that are 20 months old. So you come from the millennial generation yourself.
I'm what they call, I'm kind of on the edge.
Are you on the cusp?
Xer, yep, I'm a cusper, so
You're
I'm
an
on
Xer?
the edge. Yep, Xer millennial.
Okay, well, we have a millennial with us also who was kind enough to come in and join us, and he's the associate pastor at the Southern Pines United Methodist Church, Chae Albright.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Doing well.
You actually, we have a friend in common, Dr. Robin Moore, and you started at the Duke Divinity School where you received your Master's of Divinity in 2012.
Correct, yes.
And how did you get to Moore County?
So in the Methodist Church, ultimately the bishop appoints you to a specific church.
Okay. So
we were shocked to essentially get appointed back to kind of the backyard of where we grew up. I grew up in Chatham County, but went to Northmore High School, so went to Moore County Schools.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you are, in a way, a product of Moore County.
Yeah, in a very significant way.
And we have a friend in common, Francie Thompson. It's a small world.
It is a small world, yeah.
So you actually will have a great perspective to add today. Jolene, what got you interested in this topic, and how is it that you are an author at such a young age?
Well, I became really interested in this topic when I was working at a Christian university in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I saw the differences in perspective between the students, some of the staff, and the administration. And I was in a mid-level management position, so I got to interact with all of these groups. And when I attended a workshop on generational differences, suddenly the lights came on, and I was like, this is this is my life. This is what I'm living every day, are these generational differences.
Right. We had here, the Chamber of Commerce a couple of years ago actually had a seminar on generational differences, because in Moore County, if I'm not mistaken, we're working alongside 4 different, for the first time, I think, in our history, 4 different generations.
Yep.
Challenging, to say the least.
Yeah.
What are some of the, so you started this as a college student?
I was at that point working in a university.
Okay.
And so I saw the differences between students and administration and staff, and just in, even in common goals, trying to achieve a common goal and people's perspectives and what that should be and how to get there were so different. And so that's really where I became interested in it.
And the focus of your book is specifically on millennials. Why millennials?
Yeah, they were our student population when I was in that position. And so millennials are now, most of them are graduating in the next year or two from college. But at that point, they were the student population. And that was the population I was supposed to be serving. So I was very fascinated in them. And many, because it was a religious, faith-based institution, many of our students were preparing to go into ministry roles, such as Chae is serving in right now.
So what is help me out, because I'm a baby boomer and I don't relate well anymore, right? What is the age group of the millennials for our listeners?
Sure. There's a little bit of debate about that, but the most common range would be individuals born between 1980 and 1995. So at this point, they are those who are just graduating from college and now in their early 30s. So they're starting to step into a lot of leadership roles,
right.
But the youngest are still graduating from college.
Right. So we grew up with the baby boomers always being the center of attention.
Yes.
From the time we were born till the time we graduated, through the 60s, the 70s, and now we all are centered around all the commercials on medicines and exercise and wellness. So we're kind of taking a back seat, aren't we?
Well, and that's the thing. Boomers were, the largest generation in American history until the millennials came along, and the millennials have now surpassed the boomers. So the boomers and millennials really have dictated a lot of marketing and values, politics, industry in the last, several decades, and we Xers are just kind of stuck in the middle.
You focused on the millennials in the ministry, but there is application, is there not?
Absolutely.
To every walk of life?
Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about how that transfers over?
Well, really, to kind of understand how it works, it's important to understand how generations develop their identity.
Okay.
And so what happened with millennials is around the 1980s, when they began entering the world, boomers and the oldest Xers were their parents and had decided that kind of promoting self-esteem and healthy self-identity was really going to help this generation overcome a lot of evils. And so preschools were, you are special, yes you are.
Everybody wins,
yes,
right?
Everybody wins, everybody gets a trophy, we're not going to hurt anyone's feelings. And so that's really what drove the identity of the millennials in large part initially. But then when you start to have things like an economic recession happening as they're beginning to graduate from college and get jobs, they're like, I'm not going to dedicate my life to, a career the way my parents did. And so you get a little bit more of this, what seems to be self-focused or entitlement.
Yes.
That's how it appears to other generations.
Chae's agreeing. I can watch him here agreeing.
Would you agree with that, or what do you see among your peers?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I do think there's a lot of this entitlement mentality, and some of that I'm very guilty of myself. And so, I completely corroborate what you're saying.
I see it in our business.
Yeah,
I see it, the sense of entitlement, because as baby boomers, we didn't have it. We actually were like, our parents' way of teaching us how to swim was to throw us in the water and say, figure it out. We didn't have lessons and a lifeguard, and we didn't get rewarded for finishing in 5th place in a swimming race. And so I do see the differences in business with people. Millennials seem to have very high expectations of success.
Yes.
sure.
What about their grit? What if things don't go according to their plan?
Yeah, that is one of the challenges for managers, because they often don't have the same problem-solving or coping skills that older generations had. But one thing that's important to remember is millennials didn't raise themselves. So when the coach yelled at them as a kid, often it was mom or dad who went to their defense instead of letting them learn how to take the negative feedback from a coach or the discipline from a teacher.
Right.
Often it was another adult in their life who came to their defense and stepped in. You see that even now, parents calling bosses and, intervening in interview processes or whatnot. And so really, millennials do lack some of those problem-solving or coping skills that other generations maybe had. It's not their fault. That's someone else taught them that.
So were the millennials, were their parents baby boomers? I guess they were.
In some of the older Xers, yes, but primarily baby boomers. Yeah.
So is it true that I've thought this, every other generation can be soft or can be tough, depending upon the generation that preceded them?
Yeah, we really raise our counter point is what we raise. Somebody to compliment us, not somebody like us.
Is any of that kind of out of reaction? So the millennials, if they feel that they're a little bit soft, don't have the grit, is it a reaction by the millennials who are now parents to say, you know what, I'm going to instill this grit in my children?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're already seeing
tough.
that. Yeah, we're already seeing that. Yeah. But the beauty of it is it's not all bad. So, like you're saying, you see some of that in your generation. Sure. And I saw that in the interviews that I did. But the beauty of it is the millennials really value their own time. They value their family, and they prioritize some things that boomers and Xers didn't prioritize as a result. So while it's harder for a manager to have an employee who doesn't want to work 10 hours a day when that's needed, it is valuable in that millennials are more willing to leave the job on time and go home to a family because they do have a little bit of that sense of entitlement.
So many questions I have as I'm listening to you. Chae, you went to Duke Divinity School. How did you get to the place where you're at today? You're married.
I am married.
No, children? No children?
No children currently. No.
Okay. So what was it that prompted you to move towards the church?
Yeah. Well, I really felt called into ministry from a pretty early age, and then a series of events happened over the course of 8 or 9 years that kind of landed me at Duke Divinity School, and from there discerning to that being a pastor in a church somewhere was where I should be.
Can you define, if I may ask, what a calling is to you?
Sure.
Because there are some people your age who have never had a calling for anything.
Sure. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and I think a calling is extremely hard to define, and you would probably have as many definitions as you have people.
Right.
For me, it was this unbelievable, overwhelming sense of kind of, I guess, vocation, that God was pulling me into a certain direction. And it was something that, I just couldn't stop thinking about, couldn't stop kind of feeling that emotion almost. And it wasn't something I actually found appealing at the time. But it was just an overwhelming sense of emotion, of thought, that kind of led me to where I am.
So in your church, your parishioners represent different generations.
Oh, yeah.
So are you challenged, like Jolene is talking about, in how to communicate with each faction?
Yeah, in my experience, kind of in my life, I've had experiences that I think have prepared me perhaps better than many people could have been prepared to communicate with different generations. But there's always that generational gap. I think casual communication is not very difficult. I think communication becomes a little more difficult between the generations when there's something at stake.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I have the opportunity to work with people of different generations, not only staff people, but also lay people in the church. And sometimes my ideas differ a little than theirs.
Right.
And I think that has a lot to do with the generations.
Jolene is nodding her head,
Yeah, it really does come down to, values are what trigger a lot of the conflict. And, what my research revealed was sometimes the values of one generation versus another differ greatly, especially in the church where it's something that people hold so close to their heart, their personal faith.
Right.
And, so the stakes become very high very quickly, and then the differences can erupt in a not so pretty manner.
Well, and if I can kind of insert, I think
Please.
the tension, which tension can be very healthy, and it is healthy in these particular situations, can lead us to something that perhaps is better than what I, the millennial, think, or even potentially better than what someone in the previous generation thinks, almost like a compromise, but a healthy compromise.
Yes.
We had a situation a couple of months ago where a Civic generational person in business got their nose bent out of joint because they felt they were not being accorded the respect that they deserved. So here's how I process that. There were two different generations in conflict with one another, and it all came down to the respect that they thought they deserved. And then I thought to myself, respect is not an annuity. It's not something that you still have to earn it each day. It's not something you build up and then the world owes you a favor. And I didn't realize at the time I was stuck right in the middle of it, and I just thought about it as you were both talking.
And that is one of the differences in generations. Boomers and Civic generation or silence really worked their whole lives respecting the boss, respecting institutions, respecting systems, knowing that someday they were going to get their due.
Right.
They were going to put in their time, and then they were going to get that respect to themselves someday.
Right.
And so they have lived that. But millennials and Xers even feel you have to earn the respect. We will give you respect when you've earned it. It's not based on position or title.
That's right.
It's based on character. It's based on your relationships.
Right. You don't get a pass on courtesy just because you've been around.
Right.
It's not a foregone conclusion. And I think now, having graduated kind of at the very, in one of the worst times to graduate from undergrad, I graduated from UNC in December of 2008 when the economy was absolutely terrible.
Wow.
Fortunately, I had plans to go to divinity school, but I think it kind of became extremely clear that nothing is certain. And the kind of the what you were just talking about with the baby boomers, for example, it was, you stayed with the company, you stayed with your job, you would eventually get to where you were planning to be. Now it's completely uncertain and no one knows.
Great conversation. We're going to come back in the second set. We're speaking with Dr. Jolene Erlacher, the author of the book Millennials in Ministry, and associate pastor at the United Methodist Church, Chae Albright. We'll be right back. We are back in the second set with Dr. Jolene Erlacher and Chae Albright. Fascinating conversation about generational differences. Jolene, you were making some notes when Chae was speaking. Some things she brought up that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I just think Chae made a great point earlier about both perspectives or various perspectives coming to the table actually equal better results. And that's why it's so invaluable to have intergenerational teams or groups, because you get those different perspectives. What we were saying about, one generation raises their complement is true.
Right.
And, often society can start to swing one way if one group is in control, and another generation can bring another perspective and kind of keep us balanced. And that happens on teams, it happens in families, it happens in the church, it happens on teams. So I think that was a great point, and I just wanted to reiterate that. I think you see right now in the church specifically is tradition versus tolerance, and kind of how some of those two things are interacting and causing some really great conversations to come out, whereas the older generations kind of cling to some of the traditions that are very valuable. The younger generation has been brought up with the ideology of tolerance, and sometimes there's some conflict that emerges. That's just one example kind of where complementary perspectives can emerge.
So how does the church is in a very challenging position to be able to have such broad appeal to so many different age groups? Challenging, Chae.
It is challenging.
Right?
Yeah, it's very challenging. I think the church, perhaps now more than ever, is trying to figure out how to be relevant in the lives of teenagers, because a lot of times, parents of middle schoolers bring the middle schoolers along.
Yeah.
We should be relevant in their lives as well, but they don't have as much say in the matter.
Right.
But from teenagers to the person, like I was telling you during the break, who's at our church attends, and she's 107 years old. How do you be relevant to such a large group of people?
Yeah.
It's very difficult.
Very difficult. Is there a move amongst, Jolene, I'll ask you this, is there a move amongst millennials into the ministry, into the church?
Well, there is a lot of research out there right now about how millennials are not going to church.
Right.
The church is
That's what I thought.
hemorrhaging
That's what I
millennials. And that's why I was so fascinated by this group of people who, despite the trend among their peers to leave church or distance themselves from church, were choosing to go into the church as their vocation. And so Chae talked a little bit to that about it is a sense of calling most of them have. It is something that they feel God is calling them to this vocation. And so they have a really, apart from their personal draw to it, it's a really invested interest that they have. They feel like this is something God has directed them to do. And so the stakes are very high for them in that regard.
As long as you still have a calling, Jolene has said a couple of things that make me think that sometimes millennials don't have the fortitude. I'm not saying you.
Sure.
Don't have the stick-to-itiveness or the fortitude to stay with something for a long period of time. Is that accurate? Is that?
Yeah, I think we see that a lot in our generation, and I think that comes back to the entitlement mentality. We're entitled to have
A new epiphany.
Yeah,
a new revelation.
Yeah, we're entitled to have things work.
Do I sound jaded?
In our favor, and if it doesn't, then we'll drop it and do something else. And I'm speaking. This may be dangerous, but kind of in general terms.
I agree with you. In business, I see that. I see that the millennial generation will come in with all these highfalutin visions of success, according to them, and if it doesn't work out that way, they're off to something else.
Yeah. And there's a couple of factors that affect that. One is that what we discussed earlier about everyone getting a trophy for just showing up. So we've given them that expectation.
Right.
Throughout till college, you were getting trophies for just showing up. So now you're in the workplace and it's not working that way. It's different. It's an adjustment. But another factor is, a lot of jobs that millennials are going to have in 10 years don't even exist right now.
Right.
And so for a millennial to lock into a career and say, this is the role or this is the job I'm going to do for the next 50 years is just unrealistic. And they understand that. So to really stick with a company that they feel is failing or or a boss who's not appreciating them
Great point.
is not good career sense even.
Great point.
Because they know they have to be competitive, they have to be getting promotions, they have to be getting professional development in order to be competitive in 5 years or 10 years. And like Chae was saying, when you graduate from college in the midst of an economic recession, you understand I need to be competitive. I can't count on a job just appearing. So part of their drive, their vision for their career is tied to that. It's not just not just the entitlement thing, I deserve this, but if I get a promotion, that's going to look up good on my resume, and it's going to help me when I go to look for a job in 2 years or 5 years. Would you agree with that, Chae? Or
Yeah, I would.
Okay.
I would agree with that. Yep.
So are millennials driven by financial security, or are they driven by adulation and accolades for their success in whatever vocation? Does that?
What would be your perspective on that, Chae, and then I can speak to
Yeah. I would say that it's probably a bit of a combination of both.
Okay.
Especially with so many millennials graduating during this economic recession, or certainly when the economy's, although it seems to have improved some since 2008 or so, still not great.
There are a lot of Republicans that would disagree with you.
Yeah,
especially in Moore County.
Sure. And this is the perspective of a 26-year-old.
Right. I agree with your perspective.
Yeah, sure. But I think, what was the question? I apologize.
No, just what your group of people,
Sure.
how they look at, since you graduated,
Sure, yeah.
the world.
Yeah, so I think it's a
Accolades or money.
combination. I think it's a combination. I think there's certainly the financial stability, just because we know that it's not a foregone conclusion that it's going to be there.
Right.
But I do believe that oftentimes millennials do have something bigger in mind,
Yeah.
and there's a bigger focus that comes back to their values, comes back to their worldview, comes back to I think this sometimes almost ignorant view that we can
Ignorant bliss.
Yeah, almost. Yeah, maybe even change the world more than we expect, or more than we realistically can. It seems.
Is that
Yeah, and
right
I
on?
think in some ways, again, we've set millennials up to have that perspective. One is they're young, and youth tends to be more idealistic. But apart from that, many of them are children of boomers who worked very, very hard their whole lives and are financially successful and stable. And so millennials have been able to rely on parents a little bit more. I mean, you hear a lot about young adults moving back home for a period of time, or the parents, they're still on their parents' cell phone plan, parents are still paying car insurance, those types of things, which relieves a little bit of the financial stress and allows them to maintain a lifestyle. I just read an article this week how most millennials would rather give up their car than their cell phone or their smartphone, because there is a lifestyle. They are willing to pay for certain things, but other things are not as important. But the other piece about it is what Chae was saying, is they are very socially minded. They understand they're going to live in this world for the next 50 years. And so there are a lot of issues that are not as important to older generations that are very, very important to the young generation that understands they're going to be dealing with the consequences of some of these social issues for years to come.
But are the millennials as social a group, an interpersonal group, as the baby boomers were? You make some points. You have a great website, by the way, and there's a blog, and you have posted quite a bit of information about how they have resorted to technology for communication. We talk about it here all the time. Kids are taught to text and not to make eye contact.
Yes, that is a great point. So much of interaction among the younger generation is very shallow.
Yeah.
It is not deep. So while they have broad social networks and broad communication skills, they often don't go really deep. And part of that's youth. Part of that is also skipping from thing to thing, a low attention span.
Right.
But in social media, obviously, technology and social media has affected that greatly.
Dorothy, do we? Go ahead, Chae.
Well, I just had one question. How does that affect teamwork, and how perhaps the millennials perceive teamwork, and how perhaps the baby boomers perceive teamwork as necessary or unnecessary? Just really curious about that.
Yeah, well, millennials demand a sense of team usually because they've been brought up. I mean, part of, the self-esteem movement and all of that was also developing a sense of team. And that's why there's not winners and losers. We're all, if we've contributed to the team, we're all winners.
How do you feel about that? Curious.
Yeah.
You have 2 daughters.
Yes.
How do you feel about that?
Yes. I will tell you, my husband, I will follow the pattern of raising our complement. they will have to work hard, and they will know when they lose and when they win.
Tough love.
Tough love. I mean, already, at 20 months, you can start to teach those lessons. But I see the damage that can occur when you think you're winning and you're really not for a whole society.
Right. But then, what about the self-esteem issues that that parents are so concerned with? Oh, my child's going to be damaged if they don't get pushed along and encouraged.
Yeah.
There are tough lessons that kids can learn. They're resilient.
Unconditional love is loving you when you're winning and when you're losing.
That's right.
And so you can have a strong identity, understanding. John Maxwell wrote a book on leadership about failing and then getting up again. And, the best leaders know that you fail and then you get up and you go on, and those are the best leaders.
Chae?
And I wonder if this concept of failing forward is going to be, not as... maybe will not play as big of a factor in the millennials' lives. I mean, are more millennials saying, well, if I fail, I'm just going to do something else, and not kind of use that as a way to get back up and maybe be stronger?
Yeah, and I think that's on individual basis. I think there are millennials who are extremely resilient, who have overcome a lot of difficulty and understand the failing forward concept. But I think there are a lot who have other priorities. So when I'm failing at a job, I understand that for my family, for my emotional well-being, for my ultimate financial success, I need to switch careers or I need to switch jobs, which is something that older generations didn't do as quickly. Yeah. So in some ways, that's a sense of resiliency. But going back to your question about teamwork, I think it does affect teams in that I think generations have different perspectives on what team looks like and how teams interact.
Right.
And I think that's where all of them have a value of team, but what that looks like and how that plays out is very different.
Listening to your conversation, both of you, makes me reflect on how I relate to different generations of people. We all have a bias. We don't even know we have it. And yet I've caught myself a few times today with a certain bias, and I have to adjust it to be a better communicator. I want to talk about helicopter parents when we come back and a couple other things. This is All Things Moore County. We're speaking with Dr. Jolene Erlacher and Charles Chae Albright, the Associate Pastor at Southern Pines United Methodist. Thank you. Welcome back to our final set of All Things Moore County. I'm sorry that we only have one more set to go because there's so much to talk about, and we don't have a lot of time. But you were both speaking about the alternate generations, the way they raised their kids. We were raised one way. Your kids are being raised, I think, the same way. We, as baby boomer parents, raised a softer generation. Is that accurate, or a different value system?
Yeah, different values. I wouldn't say softer.
We didn't kick them in the butt and say, just go out there and figure it out. Tough love. What about, we've had lots of different generations on the show. We've had lots of parents. that concept of helicopter parents. I see it a lot. I'm sure you see it, Jolene. Can you talk a little bit about it and what it does?
Yeah. I mean, the helicopter parent phenomena is just really a parent who, hovers over their child and is very concerned for their safety. And it comes out of the best of intentions, a desire to protect your child, a desire to help them succeed. The negative that sometimes emerges from that is a child who feels someone will always be there to take care of them. They don't learn some of those independent skills, and then also someone who's always going to defend them, and they sometimes don't learn some skills because there's someone there doing things for them. It really also affects our society when it starts to bleed over into church youth programs and children's programs, into the school systems, into camps, where parents sometimes begin to tie the hands of people who are working in those environments. When I worked at the school, I would have parents call my office and tell me, I was working in a college, so these were college students, parents calling our office telling us how to interact with their students or what to do for them or not do for them, rather than letting their college-age student learn to navigate the systems and to deal with some of the, social things that arose on their own and really gaining those skills for themselves.
With all due respect, which planet did you want to send those parents to for a vacation, honestly?
Yeah.
You have to bite your tongue.
Yeah, you do at times. But at the same time, you understand it's because they very much care about their kids. So you have to keep that perspective.
I get a word picture as you're talking about helicopter parents, about the parents who carry the antibacterial lotion in their pocketbook. The minute their child picks her nose or touches the ground, they throw the stuff, the antibacterial cream on their hand to keep them sanitized. How are the kids going to build up their own immune system psychologically?
Yeah, that's a great point.
And at the church, with all the generations, you've got tough love parents, helicopter, all different types. Francie Thompson, who we spoke about, her daughter, I don't know if you read about this in the paper, was turned away at the prom this past spring, because her dress was too short, which was ridiculous. Francie's a great parent. She's got 3 wonderful kids. She's very proud of all of them. So there was a TV station that came down from Raleigh to interview after the brouhaha was over. And Francie sat there with the TV camera on her with Peyton. And she didn't say anything. She let Peyton carry the day. She listened to her. She kind of admired her from afar. She knew her daughter could handle it. And that was the antithesis, Chae, of a helicopter parent. She had confidence in Peyton. And Peyton carried it off beautifully. Do you recall that?
Yeah, I do, and I think with Jordan, Peyton, and Noah, I think Craig and Francie have done a wonderful job and letting them kind of experience things for themselves and not be that helicopter parent who's not only trying to protect them but also rid them of experiences that help us grow and mature into people that I think we're supposed to be.
Yeah. Teachers have a lot of pressure on them, don't they?
Yes.
Even though your book, again, is from the point of view of millennials in the ministry, the application is so widespread. But you also want to reach that group of people who are drawn to the church at the same time. So who is your audience? Who is it that you want to communicate your message to?
Yeah.
It's a great message. But
I really am passionate about empowering millennials. That is my passion, to empower millennials and following them, Generation Z, who are now in high school and middle school, to really be the most effective leaders and citizens that they can be for our society and our country moving forward. That's my heart and passion. The reason I honed in on Millennials in Ministry, because it was an area that was not being studied. There's a lot about millennials in the corporate workplace. There's some about it in education, but there was not a lot about ministry. But my passion really does supersede. I love to do training for any organization or group that is working with intergenerational teams, because I think there's so much, going back to Chae's Chae's earlier point, for us to learn from each other. But with this book, my target audience really is anyone working in the church, in nonprofit ministry, in the missions kind of field, who are working on intergenerational teams, understanding how to integrate millennials into the team and really empower them for future success in ministry roles.
Do you think the church, and when I say the church, the many different denominations that exist, is challenged in the next 15 or 20 years to maintain and to keep into the members intact?
I really feel that the church in America in 20 years is going to look radically different. and I believe part of my goal in writing this book is to start the conversation more effectively. How are we going to engage the different perspectives? Because often what has happened is the generation that is in leadership, which right now is primarily the Civic generation and boomers, kind of dictate what the church looks like and where it's going. But I really feel with our culture changing as fast as it is right now and things evolving the way they are, we have to engage the voices of Xers and Millennials in the conversation about the vision of the church and where it's going.
And how open are the authoritative generations to that?
It really depends. There are some who are very willing to engage in the conversation, and there are others who are not so willing.
Yeah.
How much of that is simply a result, because it seems from what you're saying is case-by-case basis, is a lot of that just simply a result of kind of understanding the change that will take place, not only in culture and society, but that will almost necessitate at least some change, perhaps radical change in the church to maintain its relevance in culture. Is a lot of that just, do these people understand, do some understand, and maybe some don't understand quite so much?
Yeah, I think it's both that, but what I've also seen is the senior pastors or leaders who are most effective in engaging this conversation are those who are already predisposed to engage other opinions, who have high emotional intelligence, who have strong leadership skills, that are able to rally a group of people around a conversation and come out with a common goal and motivate them towards that. And really the key comes down to asking questions and listening. And so those people who are already good at that and don't feel threatened by that really are being effective in this. Even if you're have no idea of how to use technology, you have no idea about current cultural trends, you've maybe been in your position for 30 years and you feel like you kind of are in a box. If you're the type of person who's always asking questions and engaging in healthy relationships with the people around you, you're going to be effective at the intergenerational team building.
Those are people with their arms open.
Yes, exactly.
But the definition of how people listen is so subjective. What people think is good listening, or good listening skills, are not good listening skills. But they think that if they can intellectualize something, then all of a sudden it's real to them, but it doesn't relate to the other generations. So people that are really good listeners are gifted.
They are.
And they draw people together.
Yep.
The millennial generation spends a lot of time, you mentioned earlier, on social media. How can that affiliation help facilitate their incorporation into the world with the Civic and the baby boomers?
Yeah.
Two different languages.
Well, one challenge I would put forth to boomers and Civic and even Xers is get involved in the life of a millennial or a Generation Z individual. Because it's not that millennials only want to sit on their laptop or their iPad or their phone. They want to engage in not realistic, but tangible relationship with someone in front of them. But often, older generations are so busy that we don't have the time to sit down and ask the questions and engage in those relationships. Because the younger generation is hungry for real deep relationships. They may not know how to do them effectively, and that's why they need the older generations to come alongside them and teach them, I would say.
Yeah, I think this concept of mentoring, which almost seems like you could be tending towards, is extremely important. And I do believe a lot of millennials and younger generation folks are yearning for that. And I think to also corroborate what you were saying, a lot of us are also yearning for community that cannot be achieved through Facebook
Yes,
or
absolutely.
through Twitter. And maybe that is maybe a recent development in the last 5 or 6 years, kind of out of this reaction towards so much of it being virtual community, and now we're kind of tending towards, okay, let's get back to real community,
Yeah.
person.
Yeah, I think about a committee that I was on at my church where there was a boomer, it was myself, and then there was a millennial. So that, and she was college age, and so we had very different perspectives. We were planning an event together, but we would come together, at a local coffee shop for a couple hours, every month, and do this planning and really talk and hear each other's perspectives, each other's values. And it was such great learning for all of us. And the event ultimately was great because we were able to incorporate social media and technology and some of these things that the millennial brought to the table, while also having the savvy and the wisdom of the older members to navigate some of the planning, strategy and obstacles that we encountered. So that's just kind of a snapshot of how I think it really can be beneficial to just spend time together and have those face-to-face conversations.
Yep.
Jolene, if you had one audience to speak to, would you pick parents? Would you pick the millennials themselves? Would you coach the parents? Who would you want to speak to? Because I think of a lot of different groups here in Moore County that you would be a very effective speaker for.
I mean, up till now, I've been very passionate about talking to business leaders, nonprofit leaders, church leaders, because I feel like they're the ones who can facilitate healthy intergenerational teams. And I am very, very passionate about speaking to that group. I think leaders have the ability to change a lot. But now being a parent, I also understand that all of these generational trends and traits start in the home.
Right.
And so I have developed recently a much greater passion for talking to parents, because I think sometimes we don't understand when we're busy, making bottles and changing diapers and cleaning messes, how important the little things that we're doing are in forming the next generation.
Right. When we spoke via email prior to meeting, you had mentioned that you had enjoyed listening to one of the past shows, which was the one about Moore County schools, where Dr. Aaron Spence was on.
Yeah.
And he was sitting where you're sitting, and where Chae is sitting, there was a young fourth grade girl who was as nervous as she could be. And she fought through it, and he coached her, and he talked to her. You couldn't see it because it was on the radio. And he got her to a point where she was relating, and she felt good about herself, but she brought herself out of it with the proper coaching from Dr. Spence.
Right.
And it was never said, it was just done, and it was a beautiful thing to observe.
Yeah.
And she felt so good about herself.
Yeah.
So that is what you had heard, right? Have you been involved at all with the school system here?
No, I haven't. Nope. I was involved primarily with colleges and education systems in Minnesota. Since coming here, I do teach at Sandhills Community College.
Okay.
Part-time.
Tell me about what you teach.
Yeah, I teach
course?
writing and
Do you really?
English, yes, and I love it. Great students, great faculty there. I love being a part of that community. But I've not been involved in other ways in the school system since coming here.
We have to find a platform for you. Tell me, your book is coming out next month?
Yep, September 1st.
Okay.
It's called Millennials in Ministry, and it's
Okay.
available for pre-order already on Amazon or on my website, which is leadingtomorrow.org. So yeah, I'm excited. We're less than about a month away.
Was this self-published or?
It was published by Judson Press out of Pennsylvania.
Good for you. It's there's so many people who are self-publishing. It's so challenging.
It is.
But this is your commitment, and so when you have a passion behind your commitment, that's your engine, and it's going to take you probably a much further distance than you think. Chae, you get a different perspective from this conversation from listening to Jolene. I watch you. You're a very thoughtful listener. As you're
as a millennial in ministry, it seems like her research has been done well and led her to what I would say is my experience.
I'm not a matchmaker, hardly. It occurs to me that she would be a great speaker at your church.
She would be.
sorry, I just had to say that. Just to speak to the different generations, possibly at a lot of different churches, or any social organization that covered different age groups.
Yeah, because the key towards building a healthy intergenerational team is really understanding. And what I have found when I do trainings and presentations for different organizations and churches is that as people hear the differences in the generations, it resonates with their personal experience. But as they understand why the generations each view things the way they do, it really helps them to begin to appreciate versus feel sometimes confused by their colleagues. And so that's where having these conversations is so important, because it really does, the understanding does help facilitate the appreciation and the teamwork.
Yeah. And Chae, I'd like to say that one thing you said that just completely gave me a shift was, as a baby boomer, I couldn't possibly know what it would be like to graduate school in 2008 when the world is falling apart. And so why would you or anyone in your group want to even look to us for what you have been given? You can do better yourself. And that's the attitude we had as baby boomers with our Civic parents.
You know, I think that the millennials' propensity to work as a team actually helps us see that actually we can't necessarily do better by ourselves. We are better when there's a team around us. And that team should include people that think like us, but we're best when it includes people that may think differently than we do. And that's one thing I love about being on a staff of a church that is so receptive to a 26-year-old's thoughts and ideas, because they can help coach me and guide me, but allow me to kind of have my space to think and to use kind of my energies and passions to hopefully enhance the ministry of the church as well.
Chae Albright, I'm very glad you came in to join us. You were a great addition. I love your perspective.
A lot of fun.
Yeah, and Jolene Erlacher, it was a pleasure to have you. Everything's about communication, and you obviously are a lightning rod for better communication across the generations. I wish we could continue, but we're out of time. Thank you both. Everybody, this is All Things Moore County. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you next week. Thank you.